They say you should never make a quiet person angry. But I think there's a better saying. Never, ever mistake a mother's kindness for weakness. It was my 65th birthday. The big one. The one that's supposed to be all about gold and retirement and enjoying the quiet life. But for me, it was the day the world I thought I'd built for my family crumbled into dust right in front of my eyes, and it all started with a laugh. My son David and his wife Chloe had insisted on throwing me a party. "We'll do it at our place, Mom," David had said, his voice so full of a false cheer it almost broke my heart even then. "Just family. It'll be intimate." Intimate. What a word for what it turned out to be. I walked into their pristine, modern apartment, the air smelling of lemony cleaner and expensive perfume. I'd brought my famous potato salad, the one David used to beg for as a kid, the one with the secret pinch of paprika. I held the bowl in my hands like a peace offering. "Oh, you brought a side dish," Chloe said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She took the bowl from me with her manicured fingers and set it on the counter, away from the beautiful, catered platters of food she'd ordered. The family was just them, my brother Carl and Chloe's parents, who always looked at me like I was a smudge on their designer lifestyle. We sat down for dinner, and it was all pleasant, surface-level chatter. I felt like a ghost at my own birthday party. Then David brought out the cake. It was a small, elegant thing, dotted with gold leaf. "Make a wish, Mom," he said, his smile strained. I closed my eyes. What do you wish for when the people you love most feel like strangers? I wished for the past. I blew out the single, tasteful candle. That's when Chloe chuckled. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a sharp, condescending little laugh. She looked at her mother, then back at me. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness I'd become all too familiar with. "It's just 65. It seems so ancient. I just can't imagine ever getting to that point. It must be so difficult, feeling like your life is just over." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. My son, my beautiful boy, looked down at his plate, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. He didn't say a word. He didn't defend me. In that moment, the silence from him was louder than her cruel laugh. I felt the heat rush to my face. The humiliation was a physical pain, a tightness in my chest. I saw the way her parents tried to hide their smirks. I saw the pity in my brother Carl's eyes. And I saw the triumphant little glint in Chloe's. She had finally said the quiet part out loud. To her, I was obsolete. A relic. A burden. I just sat there, a small, stupid smile frozen on my face. What could I say? "No, it's not like that." The damage was done. The party ended not long after, with quick, awkward hugs. David hugged me tight, whispering, "She didn't mean it like that, Mom." But he wouldn't look me in the eye. I drove home in a daze, the cold leather of the steering wheel beneath my trembling hands. The streets were a blur of neon and headlights. And with every mile, the humiliation began to curdle. It twisted and hardened into something else. Something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Rage. And it was in that quiet, roaring anger that a memory surfaced. Not a memory of sacrifice, but of a specific, forgotten power. You see, for the last 10 years since my husband Michael passed, I've just been mom or grandma. I've lived in my small, paid-off house, content with my garden and my books. I let David and Chloe handle the complicated things, the finances, the taxes. I was just happy to be included, to be close to my son. But before I was mom, before I was a widow, I was someone else. I was Eleanor Grady, and for 35 years, I was the most sought-after forensic accountant in the state. While Michael built his construction business from the ground up, I was the one in the shadows, following the money trails of embezzlers, con artists, and corrupt CEOs. I could look at a spreadsheet and see the story I was trying to hide. I could find the single fraudulent transaction in a sea of millions. I was a bloodhound, and money was my scent. I retired when Michael got sick. I never looked back. That life felt like it belonged to someone else. But sitting in my dark kitchen, still wearing my stupid birthday dress, Chloe's laugh echoing in my ears, I remembered. I remembered the feeling of piecing together a puzzle everyone else thought was unsolvable. I remembered the power of knowing something someone else was desperate to hide, and a cold, clear thought cut through the grief and anger. You have never once looked into their lives. David had started a new can't-miss investment firm with Chloe's father a year ago. They'd been living a lifestyle that skyrocketed overnight. The new apartment, the luxury cars, the constant vacations. David had been vague about it, saying it was complicated financial modeling. I'd been so proud, so happy for his success. I never questioned it. But now her laugh was a key, turning a lock I didn't even know existed. I stood up, walked to the hall closet, and moved aside the winter coats. In the back was a small, fireproof lockbox. I hadn't opened it in years. My fingers trembled as I dialed the combination, Michael's and my anniversary. The lid popped open with a hiss. Inside, next to my old wedding photo, was a sleek, silver laptop. My work laptop. I prayed it still had some charge. I carried it to my kitchen table, the Formica cool under my wrists. I plugged it in. The screen glowed to life, the logo appearing like a ghost from my past. It asked for a password. I typed it in without hesitation. Bloodhound 1. The desktop loaded. I opened my old, specialized accounting software. It was all there. My digital toolkit. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The quiet, hurt grandmother was gone. In her place was Eleanor Grady, the bloodhound. "Okay, Chloe," I whispered to the silent room, my voice steady for the first time all night. "You laughed because you think my life is over. But by the time mine is just beginning again, you're going to be the one begging for mercy." I pulled up the first set of corporate records for Apex Ventures, LLC, David and his father-in-law's company. And I started to follow the money. The glow from that old laptop screen lit up my kitchen like a cold, blue flame. For the first few hours, I wasn't a grieving mother or a humiliated birthday girl. I was a hunter. And the digital trails of Apex Ventures were my forest. At first, everything looked fine. A little too fine. The books were pristine, the profit margins healthy, the investor reports glowing. It was the kind of perfect, seamless financial picture that would make any casual observer nod with approval. But to my eyes, trained for 3 decades to spot the unnatural, it was a red flag. In the real world, especially with a new investment firm, there are always wrinkles. There are late payments, unexpected costs, a client who pays in weird installments. This was too clean. It was a painting, not a photograph. I started digging into the shell companies they listed as their main investment vehicles. Omni Holdings, Stellar Capital Group. The names sounded impressive, but their digital footprints were shallow. I used an old, legally gray access key I'd kept from my working days, a backdoor into certain corporate registries. What I found made my blood run cold. Omni Holdings was registered to a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. Its sole director was listed as a David E. Grady, my son. My stomach twisted. But then I looked deeper. The authorization signatures for major fund transfers. They weren't David's. I knew his signature like my own. This was a clumsy forgery. The strokes were hesitant, trying to mimic his loose style but failing. The real signature, the one that authorized the movement of millions, was a crisp, efficient script I'd seen on Christmas cards. It was Chloe's father, Robert. David was a face, a name on paper. Robert was pulling the strings. A memory flashed. David, just a boy, maybe 10 years old, crying on his bed because he'd been tricked into trading his favorite, mint-condition baseball card for a handful of common ones by an older kid. He wasn't greedy. He was trusting. He saw the best in people and assumed they saw the same in him. He'd been so easy to manipulate then. And it broke my heart to see he still was. This wasn't just Chloe's cruelty anymore. This was her father using my son, making him the fall guy for something that stank to high heaven. I felt a new kind of fear, cold and sharp. This was bigger than a nasty comment at a birthday party. My son's future, his freedom, was on the line. I followed the money from Omni Holdings. It was a classic shell game. Funds from new investors in Apex were being used to pay out massive returns to earlier investors. It was a Ponzi scheme. A sophisticated one, but a Ponzi scheme nonetheless. And David's name was all over it. I worked through the night, the clatter of the keyboard the only sound in my silent house. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in gentle pinks and oranges. I had it. A complete map. I knew every fake company, every funneled dollar, every forged signature. I knew that the lavish apartment, the cars, the vacations, it was all bought with other people's life savings. And the whole house of cards was about to collapse. The rage was gone, replaced by a terrifying, crystalline calm. I couldn't just expose this. I had to protect David. I had to find a way to pull him from the wreckage before it all came down. I printed everything. The transaction records, the forged signatures, the network of shell companies. The stack of papers sat on my table, a monument to their betrayal and my son's blindness. I needed leverage. I needed something so powerful, so undeniable, that they had no choice but to capitulate. And then I found it. Tucked away in an encrypted folder linked to Robert's email, which was child's play for my old software to crack, was a series of messages. They were between Robert and a number I didn't recognize, planning a massive final fund injection from a new set of investors, clearly the next victims, scheduled for next week. After that transfer, the messages hinted the plan was to dissolve operations. They were going to run. And they were going to leave David holding the bag, his name on every document, to face the lawsuits and the FBI. I sat back, my hands limp in my lap. The sun was fully up now. The birds were singing outside. It was a beautiful morning, and I knew what I had to do. I wouldn't go to the police. Not yet. I had to confront them myself. I had to look my son in the eye and show him the truth. And I had to look Chloe and her father in the eye and show them that the quiet, ancient grandmother they'd laughed at held their entire world in her hands. I picked up my phone. My finger hovered over David's name. My heart was a drum in my chest. This call would change everything forever. I took a deep breath, and I pressed dial. The phone rang only twice before David picked up. Mom? Everything okay? He sounded tired. Guilty, maybe. David, I said, my voice much calmer than I felt. I need you to come over. Right now. And you need to bring Chloe and her father with you. There was a long pause. Mom, what's this about? It's 8 in the morning on a Sunday. Robert is probably. Now, David. I put a steel in my voice I hadn't used on him since he was a teenager about to do something stupid. If you don't, I will be making one phone call to the Securities and Exchange Commission. And after that, I will call the FBI. Your choice. The silence on the other end was absolute. I could almost hear his mind racing, the panic setting in. What are you talking about? He finally whispered. I have it all, David. Omni Holdings. Stellar Capital. The Cayman accounts. The forged signatures. I know everything. So you get them, and you get over here. You have 1 hour. I hung up. My hand was shaking. I laid it flat on the table to steady it. The next hour was the longest of my life. I didn't move. I just sat at my kitchen table, the stack of printed evidence in front of me, and waited. Exactly 58 minutes later, I heard cars pull into my driveway. I didn't get up. I heard the car doors slam, then quick, angry footsteps on my porch. The front door swung open. David still had a key. They filed into my kitchen. David looked pale, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. Chloe looked furious, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. And Robert, Chloe's father, looked amused. He had a smug, condescending smile plastered on his face, like he was humoring a senile old woman. Eleanor, Robert said, his voice a smooth, oily baritone. This is a bit of a dramatic way to start the day. David said something about the SEC? I hope you haven't been getting confused online. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, then at Chloe, then at my son. I slowly reached out and pushed the stack of papers across the table towards them. David was the first to move. He picked up the top sheet. His eyes scanned it, and the color drained completely from his face. What is this? He stammered. It's the first page of your prison sentence, David, I said, my voice quiet but clear. If we don't fix it. Chloe snatched the paper from him. Her eyes darted over it. The fury on her face faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear. This is nonsense. These are forgeries. Are they? I asked. I picked up a single sheet from my side of the table. It was a copy of a wire transfer authorization for $2 million. At the bottom was David's forged signature, and next to it for comparison, his real signature from a loan document I'd kept from when I helped him with his first car. The difference was obvious. This one is the forgery you've been using. The one Robert taught you to mimic David. David stared at the two signatures, his jaw slack. I never signed that. Robert, you told me you just needed my signature on file for the corporate documents. You said it was a formality. Robert's smug smile finally vanished. He stepped forward and grabbed the stack of papers. He started flipping through them, faster and faster. His face grew tighter with each page. He saw the transaction trails, the shell company maps, the cracked email printouts, planning the final fund injection. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Where did you get this? He hissed. Does it matter? I said. I have it. And I know what you're planning to do next week. You're going to take that final round of money and you're going to run. And you're going to leave my son to take the blame. I turned to David. His eyes were glistening with tears. He looked like that little boy who'd been tricked out of his baseball card all over again. David, look at me. Did you know about this? Any of it? His voice was a broken whisper. No, Mom. I swear. I thought we were just really good at this. Robert handled all the back-end stuff. The numbers, the transfers. I was just the front man, talking to investors. He looked at Robert, a devastating betrayal dawning on his face. You used me. Robert didn't even look at him. He was still staring at me. What do you want, Eleanor? Money? Is that it? We can cut you in. A silent partner. That's when I lost the last shred of any doubt. He thought this was about greed. He couldn't comprehend that it was about love. No, Robert, I said, standing up. I don't want your dirty money. I want you to listen very, very carefully to what happens next. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Robert was still holding the papers, his knuckles white. Chloe had gone pale. David just looked lost, like his whole world had been ripped out from under him. I kept my eyes locked on Robert. You have 1 week until you plan to take that final round of money and disappear. That plan is now cancelled. Robert started to speak. You can't just. I cut him off. I can. And I will. Here is what is going to happen. You are not going to solicit that final investment. You are going to use every dollar left in the Apex operational accounts, not the investor funds, to begin returning money to the smallest investors first. The little guys, the ones who can't afford to lose it. That will bankrupt us. Chloe cried out, her voice shrill. You are already bankrupt. I shot back, my voice rising for the first time. You are running a criminal enterprise on borrowed time. The only question is whether you go to prison now, or you try to salvage a shred of decency. I turned back to Robert. You will provide me with view-only access to all your business accounts. I will be watching every single transaction. If I see one transfer that I didn't approve, $1 going to an account I don't recognize, I press send on an email that is already drafted and addressed to the FBI. It has all of this evidence attached. Robert's face was a mask of fury. This is extortion. No, I said calmly. This is damage control. This is me saving my son from you. You will spend the next 6 months winding this down. You will sell your apartment, your cars, your vacation home. You will liquidate everything you bought with stolen money and return it to the investors. And what happens to us after 6 months? Robert asked, his voice a low growl. You get to stay out of prison, I said. That's your reward. You and your daughter get to walk free, as the failures you are, not the criminals you wanted to be. But you will be penniless. You will have to start over with nothing. That is the mercy I am offering you. Chloe was crying now, angry, helpless tears. David, say something. This is your mother. David finally looked up from the floor. He looked at Chloe, then at Robert, and then at me. There was a new hardness in his eyes I had never seen before. No, Chloe, he said, his voice quiet but firm. He used my name. He was going to let me take the fall. Mom is the only one in this room trying to save me. He looked at Robert with pure disgust. You do what she says. All of it. In that moment, my heart broke for my son, but it also swelled with pride. He had finally seen the truth. Robert looked from David's resolved face to my unwavering one. He knew he was beaten. The fight drained out of him, and he just looked old and defeated. He gave a single, sharp nod. Fine, he spat out. Good, I said. We start now. David, you will sit with me. Robert, you will log in to every account on my laptop. Chloe, I said, looking at her. You can make coffee. It's going to be a long day. The next 6 months were the most exhausting of my life. It felt like a second terrible job. My quiet retirement was over. My kitchen table became my war room. Robert logged into the accounts that first day, his hands shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. The numbers on the screen were even worse than I had estimated. The hole they had dug was deep. There was no way every investor would be made whole, not even close. My goal shifted. We would save as many as we could, starting with the smallest. David sat beside me, his face a mask of grim determination. He was the one who had to make the phone calls. He had to look the investors in the eye, virtually at least, and tell them a carefully edited version of the truth. He said the fund had encountered unexpected liquidity issues and was undertaking a voluntary structured wind down. He offered them a partial return of their capital. Most were angry, some were understanding, a few threatened lawsuits. He took it all. It was his penance. Robert and Chloe were forced to sell everything. I saw the listing for their penthouse apartment go online. The sports cars were sold at auction. Chloe's social media, once a stream of luxury and vacations, went dark. I heard through David that she had moved back in with her parents into a small rental house. The humiliation for her was absolute. It was the consequence I knew would hurt her the most. I watched every transaction. Every dollar from a car sale, every check from the return deposit on their apartment, went into an account I controlled. Then, according to the list David and I had painstakingly created, I would authorize the transfers back to the investors. It was slow, grinding work. Some days, the anger would come back. I was spending my golden years cleaning up their mess. One evening, about 3 months in, David was over late, finishing a batch of calls. He put the phone down and put his head in his hands. He looked utterly defeated. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "For the birthday, for everything. I was so blind. I wanted to be successful so badly, to be the son you could be proud of. I walked right into it." I put my hand on his shoulder. "I have always been proud of you, David. I was proud of you when you were a cashier in high school. This," I said, gesturing to the stacks of paper, "this doesn't change that. What you're doing now, facing this is what makes me proud." He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw my real son again. Not the one trying to impress anyone, just the good, decent man I raised. The work continued. The money was returned in chunks. We managed to pay back every single investor who had put in less than $50,000 in full. The bigger investors, the ones who should have known better chasing unrealistic returns, got 50 cents on the dollar. It was more than they would have gotten if the scheme had collapsed. Finally, after 6 long months, it was done. The accounts were empty. Apex Ventures was formally dissolved. There was no big final transfer for Robert and Chloe to run away with. There was nothing left. I called a final meeting in my kitchen. Robert and Chloe arrived looking tired and worn. The glamour was completely gone. They had nothing. "It's over," I said. "The wind down is complete. The email to the authorities has been deleted." Robert just nodded, not meeting my eyes. He turned and walked out without a word. Chloe lingered for a moment, looking at David, but he wouldn't even glance in her direction. She left, closing the door softly behind her. The house was quiet again. It was just me and my son. The fight was over. We had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt like survival. For the first few weeks after the final meeting with Robert and Chloe, the house was very quiet. The constant stress of monitoring the accounts, of forcing the repayments, was gone. But the silence it left behind felt heavy. I tried to go back to my old routines. I went out to my garden. The weeds had grown a lot while I was busy with the laptop. I started pulling them, but my heart wasn't in it. My mind kept drifting back to the numbers, the spreadsheets, the look on Robert's face when he realized he had lost. I had one, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like I had just survived a long, dirty war. I felt tired in a way I never had before. David stayed in his own apartment. He called me every couple of days. The conversations were short. He would ask how I was, I would say I was fine, he would say he was okay, and then there would be a long, awkward silence before we hung up. I knew he wasn't okay. The guilt was a weight on him. He had been a part of something that hurt people, and even though he was a victim too, he couldn't see past his own role in it. He had trusted the wrong person, and that trust had cost other people their money. About a month after it was all over, he showed up at my door on a Tuesday afternoon. He was holding a small, worn duffel bag. He looked thinner. He hadn't been sleeping. I could see the dark circles under his eyes. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice was flat. "David, come in." I stepped aside. He walked in and stood in the hallway, not sure what to do. He put the duffel bag down by his feet. "Everything okay?" I asked, though I could see it wasn't. He shook his head, looking at the floor. "I lost the apartment. The rent. I can't afford it anymore. All my savings are gone. I got a job. It's just stocking shelves at the supermarket at night. It doesn't pay much." He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were full of shame. Can I stay here for a little while? Just until I get back on my feet." My heart ached for him. This was my son, my successful, bright son, reduced to this. He wasn't asking for money. He was asking for a safe place to fall. "Of course you can," I said, my voice soft. "This is your home. Always." He nodded, a quick, grateful jerk of his head. He picked up his bag and walked down the hall to his old bedroom. I heard the door click shut. Having him in the house again was strange. It was like having a ghost living with me. He would sleep most of the day because of his night job. When he was awake, he was quiet. He'd sit in the living room and stare out the window, or watch TV without really seeing it. He didn't talk much. When I tried to ask him about his job or if he was eating enough, he would give me short, one-word answers. The vibrant, energetic man he had been was gone, replaced by this hollowed-out version. I knew that saving him from prison wasn't enough. I had pulled him out of the fire, but he was still covered in burns. The guilt and the shame were paralyzing him. He needed something to do. He needed a purpose. He needed to remember that he could build something real and honest that wouldn't fall apart. A week after he moved back in, I was in the garage, looking for an old photo album. I moved a few boxes and saw it sitting in the corner, my husband Michael's old toolbox. It was a big, heavy metal box, scuffed and stained from years of use. Michael had been a master carpenter. He could build anything from a birdhouse to a piece of fine furniture. He had loved working with his hands. He'd always tried to get David interested, showing him how to swing a hammer, how to measure twice and cut once. But David had been a dreamer, more interested in books and ideas than in sawdust and nails. The toolbox had sat there, untouched, for years. I dragged it out. It was heavy. I opened the lid. The tools were all there, neatly arranged, just as he had left them. The wooden handles of the hammers and screwdrivers were smooth from use. I could almost smell his scent on them. This was real. This was solid. This was the opposite of the fake numbers and lies of Apex Ventures. I carried the toolbox into the living room. David was on the couch, scrolling through his phone, not really looking at it. I set the box down on the floor in front of him with a solid, heavy thud. He looked up, startled. "What's that?" "Your father's toolbox," I said. "He left it for you." David looked at the box, then back at me, confused. "Okay. I have some money saved," I continued. I had been thinking about this for a few days. Not a fortune, but enough. I've always wanted a sunroom off the back of the house, a place to sit and read, to have my plants. But the quotes I've gotten from contractors are too high. I can't afford them. He just stared at me, not understanding where I was going with this. So I said, looking him straight in the eye, "I'm not hiring anyone. I'm hiring you. You're going to build it for me." He blinked. Then he let out a short, bitter laugh. "Mom, are you serious? I don't know how to build a sunroom. I can barely put together IKEA furniture without the instructions. I may. I was a finance guy. He said the last words with so much self-loathing it was painful to hear. You were, I agreed. And now you're not. Now you're a man who needs to learn how to build something that won't collapse. You can learn. Your father left all his books, his old plans. It's in your blood. And I'll help you. We'll do it together. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes then. It wasn't excitement, but it was a challenge. It was a tiny spark of interest cutting through the fog of his depression. It was the first real emotion I'd seen in his face in weeks. Mom, he said, his voice weary. Where would we even start? I don't know the first thing about foundations or permits or framing. We start with the plans, I said, feeling a surge of hope. We start by measuring. We start by doing one small thing right. We don't have to know how to do it all today. We just have to start. He was quiet for a long time, looking at the toolbox. He leaned forward and ran his hand over the cool, scuffed metal of the lid. He clicked the latches open and lifted it. He looked at the tools inside, all neatly in their places. He picked up a claw hammer, feeling its weight in his hand. It was a real object, with a real purpose. Okay, he said finally, his voice quiet but clear. Let's look at the plans. That was all I needed to hear. We spent the rest of the afternoon at the kitchen table. I brought out a stack of Michael's old books on home construction and carpentry. We found a book of sunroom plans. We spread them out on the table. At first, David just stared at the complex diagrams, the lists of materials, the architectural drawings. It was a foreign language to him. But slowly he started to ask questions. What's a joist? He asked. I pointed to a diagram. It's a horizontal support beam. It holds up the floor or the ceiling. And this? A header. That goes over a window or a door. It supports the weight above the opening. We started sketching out a simple design on a big piece of paper. We measured the back of the house. We argued about how big it should be. I wanted it to be cozy. He thought it should be bigger, to let in more light. It was the first real conversation we'd had in months. He wasn't just going through the motions. He was engaged. We made a list of the tools we had and the tools we would need. We made a long preliminary list of materials. Lumber, concrete, windows, roofing. It was daunting. The next morning we got up early. David seemed different. He had a purpose. He was dressed in old jeans and a t-shirt, ready to work. We ate a quick breakfast and then got into my old truck to drive to the lumberyard. The list we had made the night before was in his hand. He looked at it the whole way there, his brow furrowed. The lumberyard was a huge place. It smelled of cut pine and damp concrete. There were massive stacks of wood everywhere, and the sound of forklifts beeping filled the air. David looked completely overwhelmed. He just stood there, holding the list, looking at the sheer scale of everything. A big man in a flannel shirt and a vest with a name tag that said Greg walked over to us. Can I help you folks find something? He asked. He had a kind face. David handed him the list. We're, building a sunroom. Greg looked over the list, his eyes moving down the page. He saw the long list of different sized lumber, the concrete, the roofing felt. He looked at David's unsure face, then at me. He didn't laugh or make us feel stupid. First big project? Greg asked David. David nodded, looking embarrassed. Yeah. For my mom. Greg nodded slowly. Good project. A sunroom's a good thing to have. He looked back at the list. Okay. You don't want to buy all this at once. You'll just have a huge pile in your yard getting rained on. You start with the foundation. You get that right, the rest follows. Let's walk through it. For the next hour, Greg guided us through the lumberyard. He was incredibly patient. He showed David the difference between pressure-treated wood for the foundation frame, which could handle being on the ground, and the standard framing lumber for the walls. He explained why we needed galvanized joist hangers and what size nails to use with them. He pointed out the bags of concrete mix and the forms we'd need for the footings. David started to relax. He began asking questions. Why this size post for the corner? He asked, pointing to a 4x4. Because it's strong, and it'll hold the weight of the roof, Greg explained. You could use a 6x6 for even more strength, but for a sunroom this size, a 4x4 is plenty. What about the floor? Do we need a concrete slab? Not for this design, Greg said, looking at our plan. A wooden deck floor is fine. Cheaper too. You'll insulate it from below. We followed him around, and David's confidence grew with each piece of information. This was a language he could learn. It was about logic and strength and following steps. It was the complete opposite of the vague, complicated financial models Robert had always talked about. We loaded the first batch of materials into the truck. The pressure-treated wood for the foundation frame, the bags of concrete, the rebar, and the metal post bases. Greg showed David how to strap it all down securely. "Safety first," he said. "You don't want a 2x4 flying through someone's windshield." On the drive home, David was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. He was thinking, processing everything Greg had told him. "He knew a lot," David said finally. "He's been doing it a long time," I said. "That's how you get good at anything." When we got home, we unloaded the truck. It was hard work. The bags of concrete were heavy, and the long boards were awkward to carry. We got everything stacked neatly in the backyard. Then we started. The first step was to mark out the area for the foundation. We used a tape measure, some wooden stakes, and a ball of string. We measured the length and width from the house according to our plan. We had to make sure it was square. We used the Pythagorean theorem, measuring diagonally from corner to corner to make sure the distances were equal. We must have measured it 10 times. David was determined to get it perfect. "Okay," he said when the strings were tight and the measurements were right. "I think it's square." Next was digging the holes for the concrete footings. We had a post hole digger, which is basically 2 shovels hinged together. It was brutal work. The ground was hard, and we hit roots. We took turns. My arms ached after just a few minutes. David insisted on doing most of it. He was sweating, his t-shirt sticking to his back. He didn't complain. He just kept digging, his jaw set. It took us the rest of the day to dig the 12 holes we needed. We were both exhausted. Our hands were blistered. We stood looking at the row of dark holes in the ground. "It doesn't look like much," David said, disappointed. "It's the most important part," I told him. "A strong house needs a strong foundation. You can't see a good foundation, but you'd sure notice a bad one." "You've started right." The next day, we set the concrete. We mixed the concrete in a wheelbarrow. It was messy. The powder poofed up into our faces. We added water and mixed it with a hoe until it was the right consistency. Then we shoveled it into the holes, set the metal post bases in, and used a level to make sure they were perfectly vertical. We worked carefully. There was no rushing this. We had to wait 2 days for the concrete to fully cure. David was impatient. He kept going outside to poke the concrete. "Is it hard yet?" he'd ask. "Like a rock," I'd say. Patience. When the concrete was finally set, we started building the wooden frame that would sit on top of the footings. This was where the real carpentry began. David had to measure and cut the pressure-treated lumber to size. We set up a pair of sawhorses as a workbench. His first cut with the circular saw was terrifying. The blade screamed, and the wood jerked. The cut was crooked. He looked at the ruined board, frustrated. "It's okay," I said. "It's just a piece of wood. We have more. Try again. Hold it steady. Let the saw do the work." He took a deep breath. He measured and marked another board. He lined up the saw carefully. This time, when he pushed the saw forward, the cut was clean and straight. He held up the piece of wood. A small smile touched his lips. "That's better," he said. We assembled the frame on the ground, nailing the pieces together. Then came the hard part, lifting the heavy, boxy frame and setting it onto the metal post bases. It was too heavy for one person. We had to do it together. "On 3, David said. 1, 2, 3. We grunted and lifted. The frame was incredibly awkward. We managed to get it into position over the footings. But it was tilting. It wasn't level. "Hold it," David yelled, struggling to keep his end up. I braced my side, my muscles straining. "I've got it." He scrambled to get a nail partway into one of the post bases to hold it temporarily. We were both breathing heavily. We used the long level, placing it on the frame. The bubble was off to one side. "We have to adjust it," David said, his voice tense. It took us another hour of slight adjustments, putting thin shims under the low spots, tapping them with a hammer, checking the level again and again. It was frustrating, Tedious work. Finally, the bubble settled right in the middle of the vial. The frame was perfectly level. We stood back, sweating and tired. The simple wooden rectangle was now sitting level on its concrete footings. It was just a frame on the ground, but it was square, and it was level. It was the foundation. David looked at it for a long time. The frustration was gone from his face. It was replaced by a look of quiet satisfaction. "It's level," he said. "It is," I said. "You built a solid foundation, David. Not many people can say that." With the foundation frame solid and level, we could start building the walls. This was a new challenge. We had to build the wall frames on the ground and then lift them into place. The first wall we built was the one that would attach to the house. It was the most important one to get right. We laid out the pieces of lumber on the grass, the long top and bottom plates, and the shorter vertical studs that would go between them. David measured and marked where each stud needed to go, 16 inches apart, just like the book said. I held the boards steady while he nailed them together. The rhythmic pounding of the hammer became a familiar sound in the backyard. He was getting better with it. His swings were more confident, and he was bending fewer nails. When the first wall frame was assembled, we stood back to look at it. It looked like a giant wooden ladder lying on the ground. "Okay," David said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Now we have to stand it up." This was the part one had been worried about. The wall was heavy and awkward. We positioned ourselves at either end. "On three," David said. 1, 2, 3. We grunted and lifted. The wall rose slowly, wobbling. For a terrifying second, I thought it was going to fall over on top of us. We managed to get it upright, but it was swaying. We had to lean it against the house to keep it from falling over. "Hold it! Hold it!" David yelled, bracing his weight against it. I was holding my end, but my arms were shaking. The wood was rough against my hands. "David, I've got it, but I can't hold it forever." I know, he said, his voice tight with strain. He was trying to get a nail into the bottom plate to secure it to the foundation frame, but he only had one hand free. He couldn't do it. "Mom," he gasped, "I can't nail it like this. It's too heavy." "Let me help you," I said, shifting my grip. "Let's both hold it and nail it at the same time." For a second, he resisted. I could see it in his face. He felt like he should be able to do this himself, that he had to prove he was strong enough to handle it alone. It was the same way he'd been about the whole Apex situation, trying to carry a burden that was too heavy for one person. "David," I said, my voice firm even though I was straining. "It's too much for one person. Let me help." He let out a sharp breath, the fight going out of him. Okay, on the count of 3, we both let go with one hand and grab our hammers. "Ready? 1, 2, 3. In one clumsy, coordinated move, we each let go with one hand, keeping the other pressed flat against the wall to hold it steady. We fumbled for our hammers and nails. My heart was pounding. The wall felt like it was going to tip over any second. I managed to get a nail started into the wood. I hammered it in, my blows quick and desperate. Next to me, I heard David doing the same. After a few nails on each end, the wall was secure. It was standing on its own, attached to the foundation. We both stepped back, breathing heavily. Our hands were sore. My shoulder ached. But the wall was up. It was straight. "We did it," David said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "We did," I said, smiling at him. That moment changed something between us. It was no longer just me giving him a project to keep him busy. We were a team. He was the lead carpenter, doing the heavy lifting and the complex work. I was his assistant, his extra set of hands. I held boards in place while he nailed them. I fetched tools. I read the next steps from the book while he worked. I made us sandwiches and brought out glasses of cold water. We built the other 3 walls on the ground and lifted them into place one by one. Each time was a struggle, but we got better at it. We learned how to brace them temporarily with long boards until they were permanently nailed together at the corners. The skeleton of the sunroom began to take shape. You could now walk inside the outline of it and see the dimensions of the room. The next big step was putting on the roof. This was the most dangerous part. We had to build rafters. These were angled boards that would form the peak of the roof. David had to cut angles on the ends of each rafter, a job that required precision. He spent a whole afternoon in the garage, using his father's old circular saw and a protractor, carefully measuring and cutting each one. He ruined 2 boards before he got the angle right. He didn't get angry. He just muttered, "Okay, learn from that," and started over. Putting the rafters up was scary. We had to climb ladders and lift the heavy boards over our heads. We worked slowly and carefully. David would get one end nailed into the top plate of the wall, and I would steady the other end from my ladder until he could come over and secure it. The first time we stood on our ladders, looking at the row of rafters we had installed, creating the gentle slope of the roof, it felt like a huge accomplishment. The structure was complete now. It was just a skeleton of wood against the side of the house, open to the elements, but you could see the room it was going to be. You could stand inside it and imagine the walls and the windows. One evening, after we had cleaned up the tools for the day, we stood inside the wooden frame. The sun was setting, and the orange light was streaming through the empty spaces where the windows would eventually go. It cast long, geometric shadows on the floor we had built. David was quiet for a long time, just looking around. He reached out and put his hand on one of the vertical studs, his fingers tracing the wood grain. "It's going to be a good room," he said. His voice was calm. "Sure. It is," I agreed. "You're a good builder." He didn't argue or put himself down. He just nodded slowly, accepting the compliment. The guilt and shame that had been haunting his eyes for months were still there, but they weren't the only things there anymore. There was a new light, a quiet pride. It wasn't the flashy, arrogant pride he'd had when he was driving a fancy car. This was different. This was the pride of creating something real and solid with his own hands. He had taken pieces of wood and turned them into a structure. He had built something that would last. We were almost done with the hard part. All that was left was to put on the roof sheathing and shingles, install the windows and the door, and then do the finishing work inside. We were both tired, our bodies sore every day, but we were ready to see it through. We had built the bones of the room together, and now we were going to give it life. The final push to finish the sunroom took another 3 weeks of hard, steady work. Our days fell into a new rhythm. We'd have breakfast together, then go outside and work until our bodies were tired. The first major task after the frame was the roof. We had to cover the rafters with sheets of plywood, called sheathing. This was hard, scary work. The sheets were big and heavy, and we had to lift them up the ladders and then nail them in place while standing on a sloped surface. David did most of the work on the roof. I was the ground crew. I would lift one end of a plywood sheet up to him, and he would haul it the rest of the way. I'd hear him moving around above me, the sound of his hammer echoing as he secured each sheet. I'd hold the ladder steady and pass up nails when he needed them. I tried not to think about him falling. He was always careful, but I still held my breath every time he was up there. Once the roof was sheathed, it was time for the shingles. This was another job that required patience. We had to lay down a waterproof underlayment first, stapling it to the plywood. Then we started with the shingles at the bottom edge of the roof, working our way up. Each shingle had to be nailed in a specific pattern so that the ones above would overlap it correctly. It was hot, tedious work. The tar from the shingles smelled strong in the sun, and it got on our hands and clothes. But David stuck with it, row by row. When he hammered in the last shingle on the peak of the roof, he let out a loud yes that made me jump. He stood up there, looking out over the neighborhood from his new vantage point, a huge smile on his face. The roof was done. The room was sealed from the rain. The next big day was when the windows were delivered. They arrived on a big truck. They were heavy, double-paned units, already set in their frames. It took both of us, plus the delivery driver, to carefully get them off the truck and lean them safely against the side of the house. Seeing them there made the project feel real. These weren't just pieces of wood anymore. We were about to put in the glass that would make it a real room. Installing the windows was a painstaking process. Each one had to be perfectly level and plumb, meaning perfectly vertical. If it was even a little off, it wouldn't open and close right, and it would let in drafts. David was obsessed with getting it right. He would set a window in the rough opening we'd framed, then check the level. He'd adjust it, putting little wooden shims under the frame to raise one side or the other. He'd check the level again. Then he'd check the plumb. Adjust again. Check again. It could take half an hour just to get one window positioned perfectly. Once he was satisfied, he would secure it from the inside with screws. Then, he would go outside and carefully apply a thick, sticky sealant around the edges to make it completely waterproof. His hands, which were already calloused from the hammer, now had bits of gray caulk stuck to them. He didn't mind. He was focused on the details. He wanted it to be right. While he was working on the windows and the exterior siding, I started on the interior. My job was the finishing work. I started with sanding. All the wood on the inside of the room, the studs, the window trim, the shelves we were building in, needed to be sanded smooth. I spent days with a sanding block, running it over the wood until it was soft to the touch. The sawdust got everywhere, in my hair and my clothes, but it smelled good. It smelled like progress. After the sanding was done, it was time to paint. I had chosen a warm, creamy white for the interior walls and trim. I painted the first brushstroke on the primed wood, and the color transformed the space. It was no longer a construction site. It was starting to look like a room in a home. The white paint made the space feel bright and clean and new. I painted carefully, cutting in around the windows and the corners. It was quiet, methodical work, and I enjoyed it. I was putting the final touch on the structure my son had built. The last major task was the flooring. We had decided on a laminate floor that looked like light oak wood. It was durable and easy to clean. We laid it together. We started in one corner, placing the first plank. Each subsequent plank clicked into the one before it. It was satisfying work. There was a clear system to follow, and with each click, another piece of the floor was locked into place. We worked our way across the room. When we put in the very last piece near the far wall, we looked at each other and smiled. The floor was done. The room was complete. There was nothing left to do but move the furniture in. We didn't buy anything new. We brought in a comfortable old couch from the living room that had always been a bit too big for the space. We brought in a small wooden side table that had been my mother's. We brought in my favorite plants from around the house and placed them on the shelves David had built into the corners. The afternoon we finished, we stood in the middle of the room, just looking around. The late sun streamed through the clean windows, warming the space. It was perfect. It was more than I had ever imagined. "I can't believe we built this," David said, his voice full of quiet wonder. "We did," I said. And I meant it. He had done the hard construction, and I had helped, but this room was the result of both of our efforts. That night, we ordered pizza and ate it in the sunroom, even though it was a little chilly because we hadn't figured out the heating yet. We didn't care. We were just happy to be using the space we had created with our own hands. A few days later, David got a phone call. It was from Greg, the man from the lumberyard. Greg's brother-in-law, Mark, was a general contractor. He was swamped with work, building a new subdivision of houses on the other side of town, and he was desperate for reliable help. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was honest work. Greg had been impressed with David's dedication and his willingness to learn on our project, and he had recommended him. David told me about the call that evening. He was hesitant. "I don't know, Mom. I'm not a real carpenter. I just built one room with my mom's help. These guys are professionals." "You are more real than you think," I told him. "You showed up every day. You learned. You cared about doing it right, about it being level and square. That's what a real carpenter does. It's not about knowing everything on the first day. It's about being willing to learn and not cutting corners. Greg saw that in you. That's why he recommended you." He thought about it for a day. I could see him wrestling with his self-doubt. But the next morning, he called the contractor back and took the job. It was hard, physical work. He'd come home exhausted, his clothes covered in dirt and sawdust. But he'd have a look of satisfaction on his face that I hadn't seen in years. He was learning new things every day from the experienced carpenters. He was part of a team, building real houses for real families. It was the complete opposite of his old life pushing paper and making hollow promises about investments. He started saving money again. Not for a flashy car or a luxury vacation, but for a deposit on a small, simple apartment of his own. He was building a new life, one paycheck, one honest day's work at a time. The shadow of Apex was finally starting to lift. He was going to be okay. As for me, I had my son back. The real David. The one who wasn't trying to impress anyone. A year passed. Life settled into a new, quiet rhythm. The constant anxiety was gone. My days were simple. I tended my garden, I read my books, and I spent most of my time in the sunroom. It was the heart of the house now. In the mornings, I'd have my coffee there, watching the sun come up and light the backyard. In the afternoons, I'd sit on the old couch and read, surrounded by my plants. The room was always warm and bright. It was a peaceful space. Every time I sat in it, I remembered what we had built, not just with wood and nails, but with our time and our effort. It was a constant, quiet reminder that we had overcome something terrible. David was doing well. He was still working for the general contractor. He'd been promoted from a basic helper to a junior carpenter. He was learning to frame walls and install windows and doors by himself. He came over for dinner every Sunday without fail. He'd tell me about the houses he was working on. He talked about roof pitches and load-bearing walls and proper insulation with a focus and passion I'd never heard when he talked about finance. His hands were permanently calloused now, with little nicks and scars from saws and hammers. He was proud of them. They were the hands of someone who built things. Being known as a reliable, hard worker meant more to him now than any fancy job title ever had. He had moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't much, but it was his. He'd bought the furniture himself slowly with the money he'd earned. There was no debt. No lies. Everything was paid for. It was all real. One Sunday, he was quieter than usual during dinner. We had finished eating and were drinking tea in the sunroom. The light was fading outside. I ran into someone today, he said, not looking at me. Mark Stevens. He was an early investor in Apex. I felt my body go still. I put my mug down carefully. What happened? I was at the hardware store, buying some caulk for a side job. I saw him in the aisle. He recognized me. At first, he looked angry. I braced myself. I thought he was going to yell, or maybe even take a swing at me. David took a slow breath. But he didn't. He just walked over. He said, "I heard you're a carpenter now." I told him I was. He nodded. Then he said, "My wife and I, we used the money you returned to fix our roof last winter. It leaked for years. It was just enough to get it done." Then he just looked at me, nodded again, and walked away. David looked up at me. His eyes were wet. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten me. He just told me that the money fixed his roof. I reached over and put my hand on his. We sat in silence for a minute. That simple statement from Mark Stevens was more powerful than any apology or any punishment. It was the final piece of David's healing. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about a roof over a family's head. It was about something necessary and solid. David had spent the last year building things for people, and now he knew that the small amount of good he'd managed to do in cleaning up the mess had also, in its own small way, helped build something necessary too. "You made it right, David," I said, my voice soft. "As right as you possibly could." He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Yeah," he whispered. "I guess I did." That was the last time we ever talked about Apex Ventures. That chapter was finally, completely closed. Life went on calm and predictable. I thought all the drama was behind me. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon. It was raining hard, a steady gray downpour. I was in the sunroom, repotting a plant. My hands were covered in dark, rich soil. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on a towel and went to the front door. I opened it, and Chloe was standing on my porch. She was drenched. Her hair was stuck to her face and neck. She wasn't wearing a designer coat, just a thin, cheap jacket that was soaked through. She looked years older. All the polished confidence, the smugness, was completely gone. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. She just looked exhausted and desperate. We stood there for a long moment, just looking at each other. The rain poured down between us, hammering on the roof of the porch. "Eleanor," she finally said, her voice shaking. Can I please come in?" A part of me didn't want to let her in. This house, especially the sunroom, was my sanctuary. It was the place we had built after the destruction she and her father had caused. but the sheer desperation on her face was undeniable. I stepped back without a word and gestured for her to enter. She walked into the hallway, dripping water all over the floor mat. She looked around, and her eyes immediately went to the sunroom. I saw her take it in, the warm light, the comfortable furniture, the green, healthy plants. A flicker of something, maybe pain, maybe regret, crossed her face. She was standing in the warmth and comfort we had built, while she was clearly standing in a storm. "What do you want, Chloe?" I asked. I kept my voice flat and neutral. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "It's my dad," she said, the words tumbling out quickly. After everything fell apart, he fell apart too. He started drinking heavily. He got mixed up with some new people, worse people. He was trying to make a quick buck again, to get back what he lost. He owes them money. A lot of money. I didn't say anything. I just waited for her to finish. "They're threatening him," she said, and her voice broke into a sob. "They're threatening us. We have nothing left. We have nowhere to go." She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading. "You have to help us. Please, Eleanor. You're the only one who knows about these things. You're the only one who is strong enough. I'm begging you. Please have mercy." There it was. The begging for mercy. The words from the title of this whole story. But hearing them now in my quiet hallway, they didn't give me any pleasure. They didn't make me feel powerful. They just sounded sad and pathetic. I looked at this young woman who had laughed at me for being old, who had looked down on me, who had been a part of a plan to ruin my son and leave him in jail. She was completely broken. Her father's greed had finally consumed everything, including her. I felt a strange calm. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was a simple choice. "Chloe," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I can't help you." Her face crumpled. "But you know what to do. You stopped him before." "No," I interrupted her, not with anger, but with a finality that left no room for argument. "The help you need isn't from me. It's from the police. If someone is threatening you, that's who you call. I am not a fixer for your father's newest mistakes. I am not your shield. I am just a grandmother who wants peace in her own home." I walked to the front door and opened it. The rain was still coming down in sheets. "You need to leave now." She stared at me, the last bit of hope dying in her eyes. She had come to the person she thought held all the power, begging for that power to save her. But my power wasn't for her. I had used my strength to protect my son and to help him build a new, honest life. I would not spend that strength now on cleaning up Robert's newest, even more dangerous mess. She walked back out into the rain without another word. I closed the door. I turned the lock. I leaned against the solid wood for a moment, my heart beating fast.